Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry I cannot be with you this afternoon, particularly because I miss the possibility of experience in the flesh what I believe is going to be an extraordinary exhibition by Belinda, curated by Simone and Lucrezia, to whom I'm very grateful for the invitation to, even I cannot be there in presence, to be with you guys remotely. I'm going to try to be very succinct and to bring together some ideas that had to do with my own curatorial practice, but also that I hope it responds or problematize or bring together nuance or look for other ways, other avenues to consider some of the critical issues that the exhibition question, but also the way in which Simone and Lucrezia have been working with this idea of the invention of Europe, which is critical to understand modern world, but also critical to understand the role of the institutions in the context of the modern experience, and in that sense, I love to, before we get into material, I love to consider what it is the museum takes on as a colonial apparatus in the rest of the definition of the way in which epistemologies and other aspects of this approach, as I said, of the epistemology of restitution of a possible epistemology of the formulation of the museum as a space of enunciation for the new formulation of communities that, as Michel Rothroyd would have said, have been silenced. No? And in that sense, we are facing, I hope I getting this right, and otherwise you will have to apologize me. We are confronted to storytelling in the sense that art as a language bring together both the formulation of a certain reality, but also the fabulation and the fiction that can come with it. And fiction, in a way, I want to address it as something uncertain that lead us to multiple possibilities against something certain that remain within the context of a polarized world that, as it was depicted by the Western epistemology. But what is the role of the museum and what is the way in which the museum have addressed this, and what is the possibility for the contemporary experience of the museum to somehow repair or restore certain traumas and silence and injustices that the history and the museum as an apparatus or as a vehicle of history to make its subjects have put in place. And I want, so as I run through this, I know you started this morning looking at the modern colonial matrix rhetoric. So I hope I'm not repeating some of the things that have been said, but I feel like this is critical to our understanding. No? I'm going to start the presentations right away. And while I'm looking for ways to do that, I wanted to thank, of course, Adriana, that has been instrumental in my participation here, although the trip couldn't happen at this very point. But I look forward to bringing together some of these ideas in April when I come to Merano. So as I was saying, one of the critical important is how the museum has been the colonial apparatus of the state, and it was for many years at the center of the organization of colonial data compilation, right? And I said this using this terminology, which is much more from IT, just thinking about how Benedict Anderson in the 6th edition of his Imagine Community start to consider what it will mean, what was the role that census, map, and museums had taken in the shaping of the other, no? In helping the definition of this imagining community of the modernity, and how everything that was beyond us, those communities, was left out. In that sense, Anderson, no, talks about how the maps were, the elements to define and confine the territories. The census were the tool, no, to limit the capacity of those individuals to be transformed into something they wanted. If we use, for instance, which I know is of Belinda and the curator's approach, no? If we use relation, or if we use Glissant's relation, the notion of relation, or opacity, for instance, right? We see that census is the first structural illustration, no, enlightenment tool for determine in a very particular way, and I use in particular here as an address to the modern epistemology as well, no, that the particularization of the subject of otherhood through census, no, because it implies you have been defined by others. And then, of course, the museum is there to capture everything that is part of the antiquity, and capture everything that has to do with how the ancestral power, the symbolic power, the capacity of some of the liminal experience that come with certain belief and spiritual engagement of different communities, of knowledge, I will say, of epistemologies, as also Belinda in some of the works, no, nursery rhymes and others remind us, are somehow not considered in the structure that the museum put in place. It says, of course, when we are talking about something from the past, or something that is distant from the Western epistemology. But how a contemporary museum address that, understanding that if you don't have an object that you have to restitute, what is there to repair? And what is there to repair is a platform for enunciation. What is there to repair is the absences of certain narrators and agents, of a platform that give agency to artists, curators, thinkers, any individual really, to get a sense of belonging, to get a sense of appropriation of the institutions, but also through the institutions, the power that comes with it. And in this beautiful Jan Pejovsky visual essay that he did for Radical Museology, the book of Claire Bishop, that observed what contemporary museums are for and what contemporary museums are detailing are for, she questioned the idea of the power of the we. But of course, who are we? No? And I went back to some of the references that Raoul Peck uses in his extraordinary documentary, Exterminate All Brutes, in which he's asking that perhaps we have been told the story the wrong way. And here he uses story and not history, because still history is a tool for the formulation that we could bring together on ourselves. So he's insistent that we need to talk about it, that we need to be able to confront what it, not necessarily to look for the evidence. The evidence are there. The evidence are there since the 19th century. When Hegel is talking about history, he's defining history, thinking about, the Jacobins and thinking about the independence in the United States, but he's not considering, as C.L. James remind us, or as, later on in the centuries, Susan Bangmore reminds us also with the Hegel 80 and the Universal History book. But together also with Michel Troyot, we see, that what we really are missing in this case is the approach of a reality that was that can tell us history, that can engage in history making, but that really also offer the possibility to think, to consider, how we can summarize history of the world and how history making renders history as a participatory experience, in which any of us can get an engagement, if we are to believe Raoul Peck, Troyot, and also Susan Buck-Morss, if we are to confront those evidence of the history, and if we are to position ourselves, in that context. But again, the question is, who are we, and how certain ideas of who we represent can be traces in the context of other initiatives that had to do, for instance, with what one can experience, as Sara Ahmed will say, the notion of whiteness. And I want to bring the notion of whiteness in the way that Sara Ahmed addresses. If you have seen Raoul Peck presentation or the 4 hours documentary, you'll see that he will talk about white supremacy. You'll see that we hear in the news and about white privilege. And to me, the problematics of that is the position whiteness as something aggressive, as something that is hurtful and that exercise violence in an immediate way. But what I found fascinating of the definition of the phenomenology of whiteness that Sara Ahmed discussed is the fact that she's considering whiteness as a phenomenological issue, a question, as is, you can read here, that is lived as a background of experience. And in doing so, she considers whiteness without assuming whiteness as an ontological given, but something that has been received and become given over time. Meaning, if we think about whiteness, we had to explore also how, the ongoing and undefined history of whiteness, which orientates bodies in a specific direction, right? And the orientation here is very important. She recovered, for instance, ideas around the ontology of Frantz Fanon's and the way in which Frantz Fanon noticed not only that he is enunciating, he is, pointing, and that's what I'm signaling, as a Black person, but also he noticed he's a Black person within a white world. And that is exercise of experience, and everything that we experience, everything that surrounds us as whiteness is very important. No? Whiteness is a category of experience that disappears as a category through the experience, and how, take a space. No, it was said in the other image, right? So here we're going back to this idea of whiteness being worldly. Whiteness disappearing in a world in which redescribing this whiteness is critically important. Whiteness as that may coherence our world. And she mentioned this idea that how if one relocate, the risk of relocating whiteness, the risk of originating in our own desire to create spaces to speak, intellectual, empirical, to speak about whiteness, which is not in any way to dismiss the concern. We need to consider whiteness becoming worldly as an effect of reification, right? There is an objecthood to whiteness, and we all go through that materiality in a way that it constrains us. So that's, again, this sentence, which for me is very clear. Whiteness is real material and is lived, right? The materiality of whiteness, the experience of whiteness determine our positionality, our experience. And I was saying that because I feel it's critically important in some of the things that we are going to explore, because museums are also institutions that are explored and referred in whiteness. Another thing that I want to, and I'm going to go back to whiteness in a minute, and how, for instance, some of that references take on the the space of enunciation of the institution. And for that, I had to say that one of the key things for me in the formulation of a certain idea of the formulation, I will say, sorry, of a certain idea of how that explore notions of not only of wineness, but also how other experiences which wine somehow had enforced through the museum can find a space. No? And these historias del arte desde Barcelona are stories from our histories, I should say, instead of our stories, from Barcelona, was a program that presented perspective that were somehow normalized in the discourse of our history. This is previous to my time. And the program was arranging a diversity of theories and looking for ways in which to address this. And I'm presenting this because I also want to say that I'm not the first person that tries to do this. I could have explained you a lot about what it means to, for instance, look at the when we keep talking about the decolonization of the museum. I have the impression that at this point in the 21st century, in 2025, we need to start decolonizing the decolonizing discourses because we had normalized those stories and histories of the colonization. We have normalized those meanings. No? And in that sense, for instance, I want to recover this working group, which was is a thinking, practice, and activist Afro-Negros, Afro-Black groups, no? Which situates, processes, researches, and movements of the diverse projects. And some of the people that it was linked to these projects, as you can see, it only operates within the context of an independent study progress that we did in 2018 till 2019, so previous to my arrival to MACBA. And all of that has to do with this bar. But also, you know, one of the things that I was thinking was critical for us was also to present this project by Zahia Rahmani, which was part of one of the Dhaka Summit with Diana Campbell, in which he was looking at the journals that were produced, no? All the critical and cultural journals that were produced since the 19th century to the present, looking at the way in which not only African but also other parts of the world were transformed by this independence or sort of like anti-imperial enormous ways in which the different communities were hosting ways of critically thinking about self-determination, enunciation, anti-imperial self-enunciation, and anti-imperial fights for struggles of liberation, both in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Global South, as we get to know it, or the project of the Third World, as Vijay Prashad will tell us in The Darker Nation. And that was important because when we presented this project, we realized that 11 of the languages that were spoken in El Raval, this is where MACBA is situated, and you can see, you know, if whiteness is something physically living as material and experience, the fact that the museum is white is not, it's not, you know, you can also use it as a metaphorical thing in the context of a neighborhood that have an incredible history of different and very diverse community that perhaps we had never paid enough attention, but that that perhaps you could also consider what it means to bring 30% of the population in Barcelona is diverse, and they are part of this group that belongs to the immediate neighborhood and the immediate community that one can see at MACBA. In that respect, as I was saying, one of the key things that resonated for me when I arrived to the museum was the fact that we presented the work of Teresa Lanceta, an artist working on textile that have an incredible influences by communities around the world that had been originally working with textiles to, seems, Arabic communities elsewhere, but also locally in Barcelona, and all the Latin American imaginary and the way in which those epistemologies, those modes of knowledge were somehow revealed through the making of these weaving sources, right? And in fact, the weaving as an open source was critical to understand this project. I just wanted to take a minute to discuss this project, which again happens in the context of my arrival to Barcelona, and is also 2 years in the making with people in the Department of Education at the museum, with Nicolas Malevé, Teresa Lanceta, Teresa being, this artist, wonderful artist that was Premio Velázquez a couple of years ago, Nicolas Malevé, an artist that worked in the Nordic Institute for computational vandalism, together with others, and in which they explore the capacity of technology to render visible, some aspect that perhaps, through data, some aspect that perhaps remain uncharted and unexplored through our day-to-day experience. And in this case, what you see here is like a computational map in which you can see how the students in these classes, people that were between 12 and 13, right? Like people that is almost going to be in ESO. These are the last 3 courses of the secondary school. And that we're working for 2 years, going around the neighborhood, trying to understand who they were, but also to understand who were their neighbors, trying to see how they were, trying to claim, I will say, the right to opacity, the right to be whoever you want to be, despite the imposition of a category. And there was, of course, a sense of a definition imposed in the neighborhood, a definition imposed to the communities that live there and some of the workers that live there, and they use labor and the labor condition, but they also their own history, the history of their parents, their families, but also the history of these people that are working in El Raval to try to map the neighborhood differently. Also, one of the things that they did was to work with the team at the museum, trying to engage with them in a way that will also tell them more about what they could expect, and how the museum is not only a place for art, it's also a place for professions, technical professions that help us to tell the stories that we told, but also a space in which they can find ways to enunciate themselves through the experience that we've seen. And I was saying for me, and I was looking at some of the works that Belinda has done in the space, and I was told that, I'm missing the experience of going through the rooms. And I talk about this in the past, how, in this notion of the museum, and very much I will show you a couple of images later of how the Mayer building, which is the main building of this of the museum in Barcelona, the Mayer building, this is the space here, and then we have this convent, and also the library and documentation space, the research center, where in a way what occurs is that you are invited to the quintessence modernist experience. It's a building, the main room is almost a cathedral, you walk through it, and as you walk, you distance yourself from this is, as you can see here, there is like this incredible crystal curtain, I will say, that is put it between the building and elsewhere outside, and you have the feeling that you are connected with the outside, but really you cannot see the outside while you are in the lower part of the ground floor of the building. And only when you start walking up through this ramp, only when you're going to that promised space that the museum had given you, you see disappearing yourself from the day to day. This investment of the architecture of the museum, but also the museum as a tool, as something that brings you to another time, was critical. But as I was saying before, for me, the most important aspect of that experience with the students was the fact that first they were talking in the 11 language that we can find in the journals as well, the journals from seismography of the struggles. But also not only that, is that by them explaining us not only the works of Teresa Lanceta, not only the experience that they have in the neighborhood, but their own, the way that the art has changed and empowered their life, by they enunciating who they were, who they believed to be at that very moment, they transformed the museum. And I think we owe, as an institution, that the echo of their voices is still something tangible that people can live through. So if we were saying before that whiteness was a material lived an experience, I want the echo of these voices, of these students, of the future of the world, of the future of Barcelona, in 11 different tones, to be the echo that we go across, a material echo that we can shift in between to be able to engage with the museum differently. No? And these ideas of how one engage with the museum differently is very much part of what I'm trying to build. Give me just 1 second to continue and to allow you to think for a minute in some of the things that I'm trying to build here as a response to the show and to the day today. As I was saying, another critical aspect for me is to consider what is happening in Barcelona. No, I don't want to produce a project that at the end is going to be I was asking to my team, which is probably they have an average of between 25 years old to 45. And I was asking them, what are the exhibitions you remember that somehow are addressing what it means, to work in this sense, what it means to be African art, or to what is happening in contemporary experience of art, etc. And none of them was able to tell me more than 2 or 3 shows. And I was thinking, okay, I don't want, when we bring together the project, so I started to work for the past 5 years. I've been working with Matthew Bukowski, Adam Getachew, and Antoine Vert in an exhibition called Project the Black Planet, which will take me to the last part of my presentation in a minute. But one of the things that I was saying to the team is that I don't want to bring a show to Barcelona that is going to be forgotten. I think it's very important to address this notion of anti-colonial Barcelona and the possibilities that Project A Black Planet comes to us. No? And I remember a report published by the possibility of establishment of an anti-colonial center, and the writer and theorist Yvan Delannoy was telling us about like how a place like Barcelona could address could consider the city as an open-air museum showcasing the history and the impact of colonialism and the slave trade, and how, for instance, that sense of the city being that space, and I want to show you now this image of the dismounting of a statue that belonged to a slave trader. The apparent, so as I was saying, the critical stance, the Delannoy, assert that the city maintains a critical stand despite the history that perhaps because of it. And it's apparent that the active presence of diaspora has something to do with that kind of collaboration with local and international academics, institutional and social movement leaders, leaders, intellectual, political activists, along with a growing number of citizens that have fostered a local history of anti-racism activism, as you could see earlier. No? Over the past decade, the effort had led to varying degrees of success, advocating for a greater agency and political representation in aspects of Barcelona cultural life. And amidst the history, and I'm going to show you some references to other projects that, of course, were occurring at the time of my arrival, which is cultural as it is sociopolitical, the base on the restitution of plundered heritage and the ministerial declaration, because that happened here, no? The Minister of Culture declared that there should be a decolonization of the Spanish museums. They open a public discussion. However, I think that public discussion at best lack historical perspective and a much needed international comparative study, and at worst insist on avoiding some of the critical issues, no? That structural and systemic fears to the difference dominates the current, if not insisting in something that already happened, let's say institutional paradigm. So how does MACBA, as a public institution, envision its role in this history, in these conversations, and in this social political environment, in this cultural, political, and artistic moment? How can we, through the formulation of our program and public events and exhibitions, could go through its research, the support of the investigative activist practice and the community projects addressing the historical juncture, while paying attention to the way in which futures, mutual futures, can be based. And I'm presenting here you with some of the ideas of projects that we have done, like this of Ruj Rahalili, that look at the notion of the circle as a production of an environment in which some, as you can see here, for instance, some of the project between Circle and Constellation that I have the luxury to curate together with Hiwai Chu, our head of exhibition, and of course with the collaboration with the artists. She recovered these ideas of the way in which the MTA workers in Paris in the 1970s create this character through a series of groups of theater, and particularly street theaters, that were developing this sort of project in which, as I said, some of the references to the sociopolitical role of these workers, but also the undocumented workers, also the migrants, and could have already in the 1970s, and then how she brought some of these references to al-halaka, which means a circle of listener, to bring back the agency of some of these protagonists. But also we had looked at ways in which we can do sort of like a programming that is not necessarily just an exhibition or not necessarily just a conversation, and that for us, this sort of like a more impactful debate between, what it is that happened within the arts and what it is that happened outside the arts is also critical in the presentation of projects that we do at MACBA, together with people like Tanya Adam Safura, that help us to read this through experiences in the context of Barcelona. She was, part of the Historias del Arte de Barcelona, as that you saw slightly at the beginning of the presentation. So anyway, how the museum, for instance, through also other experiences like the Ramane, the fact of Carlos Mota, bringing sort of discussions around histories of religion, the homotherization of the pre-Hispanic stories in the Catholicism, which is critically linked to what Belinda is doing there, or for instance, the work that he developed with other collections collectives in the context of the fight for, the end the stigma around HIV, AIDS, and also, the way in which, communities, indigenous communities were evangelized, or indigenous communities were assumed notions of gender through the perspective of religion. All of these are examples of, ways on queer-raising history, but also to bring back, aspect of homoerotization of the religion, but also thinking about more radically on all those stigmas. So for us, the co-production with the Art Institute of Chicago, as I was saying, investigate the artistic and cultural production of Pan-Africa and its key formulation as a sort of Marxism, as a sort, again, this critical ephemera material making that somehow referred to this notion of a struggle, but also we can see in the way that Leve production and Tom Manta, the street vendors in Barcelona, collaborated in that project that you saw. That was in the Venice Biennale of Architecture in the last edition. I want to suggest for me this idea that, the possibility of imagining, of engage with something that is not circumscribed simply to the time and the space of the exhibition experience. No? And I want to suggest to an extent that there is something in exhibition making, that the exhibition itself offers us a space, not an exhibition, but any exhibition. No? Bourgeois Halili did the same, Carlos Mota, Song for Many Movement, no? The project on solidarities that you saw earlier too. No? Exhibition making offers a space of institutional temporality which not exhausts itself and the parameters by which it's constituted. This approach of the aspect of exhibition, for instance, in the case of the project Abra Planet, is in its iteration in Barcelona at MACBA, could transform the museum into a space of resistance and affirmation, a space of plural consciousness and representation, a timeless space, a space of relation. And here I think the Ito Barrada map is quite poignant, well, quite apparent, a space of relation in which our search for answer, past, present, and future, weld together in a communal agency. And for that communal agency, I dedicate, some of these words, and I hope I haven't taken too much time of everybody, but I hope this helped to introduce a range of ideas and topic that I love you can now discuss upon, and I hope I can participate in the conversation, but otherwise I'll see you in April when I come to see the show. Thank you for listening.